in worship this morning. And congregation, thank you for singing. Amen. I can hear you sometimes. But please, please, please always know that when we come here, we're here to worship God, not have to worry about somebody sitting next to us and going to judge us or whatever. We come here together to love one another. And listen, if you're off key a little bit, that's okay. All right? It's okay. It's all right. Hear me sing, it'd be a lot off key. So that's right. Just make that joyful noise unto the Lord. Turn, if you will, please, to Philippians chapter 4. And we're going to be looking at verse 8. And then we'll look at Philippians chapter 1 and take out some passages out of that. Now, my message title this morning might be unusual. All right? Lessons from the garbage truck. Now, I got that title. I debated on it, but this is good, folks, here. You let me have a little slack here when I come up with some stuff. But I was reading a story about someone had wrote, and they were sharing their testimony about an experience that they had in a lesson that a taxi cab driver had taught them about a garbage truck. And so let me just read this guy's testimony. He said, one day I got into a taxi and we took off for the airport. We were driving right in the right lane when a car suddenly spit out of an alley right in front of us. My taxi cab driver slammed on his brakes, skidded, and missed crashing into the other car by inches. You wish you'd done that with that deer, Andy, amen? Missed it by inches, yeah. But anyway, this car, comes zipping right out of this alley right in front of the taxi cab driver. And the driver of that car stuck his head out the window and began to yell at the taxi cab. And my taxi cab driver just smiled and waved at him. So curiosity, the man said, got the best of me. And I said, why did you just smile at him? That guy almost caused a wreck and then began cursing you. That was when my taxi cab driver taught me what I now call the lesson of the garbage truck. He explained that many people are like garbage trucks. They run around full of garbage, full of frustration, full of anger and disappointment. As the garbage piles up, it needs to be dumped. And sometimes they'll dump it on you. Don't take it personally. Don't take the garbage and dump it on other people. Just remember that that person's life may not be something that yours is. They may be carrying around this stuff for a long, long time. What I always do, the taxi cab driver said, I just smile and wish them well and move on. You see, the Apostle Paul gives us some great advice about doing just that. A lot of us may have garbage. I preached a sermon about baggage. Sometimes we carry things in our life, and sometimes it gets full. Sometimes we feel like we're about ready to explode. And yes, sometimes, even in church, you might come across a fellow church member that is full of stuff. They're full of frustration. They're full of things that have happened in their life. And you may just happen to hit the button and that garbage truck thing just kind of begins to dump on you. But you know what? If you know that person, if you've had a relationship with that person, and you know that it's just out of character for them to just begin to dump on you, then you know what? Take it with a little bit of encouragement. That person knows you well enough, that they felt good enough, you might want to say, or open enough to be able to just dump this stuff on them. Because sometimes that's all people needs to do. Sometimes they just need to dump their load of garbage. And then they're better. And if you don't take it personal, if you take it in a way that you can help that individual, then you know what? Both of you are winners. Both of you can give glory and honor to God. So here's the big lesson that I found in the story. And I want us to just pay attention to it as we go along. Paul writes in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, something to do with our attitude, something to do with how we think about life as we go through it. He said this, finally, brothers, whatsoever is true, whatsoever is noble, whatsoever is right, whatsoever is pure, whatsoever is lovely, whatsoever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Well, what's he saying? Well, you got to really dig a little deep into that verse, because he's mentioned a lot of good things. And what Paul is saying, if there's anything praiseworthy, anything that you can say. So another thing is always look for the good. That's what he's trying to say. If there's anything praiseworthy, if there's anything good that you can find in that person, then look for that. Yes, that person may have dumped a whole load of garbage on you, but think past. Maybe that person, like I said, has had a rough week. Maybe they've gone through some stuff. Maybe they've gone through a lot of things that you don't know about, but they at least feel comfortable enough to be able to share with you all the things, that have been going on. And so don't take it personal. Take it with a little ounce of love and think about, find some good thing. Now, all of us can be rough around the edges. Amen? For me, okay? Some of us are not always lovely. Some of us are not like a teddy bear. Some of us are like a porcupine. And the more that we try to draw that person closer to us, you know what happens if you're trying to hug a porcupine. You're going to get the prick. It's going to hurt a little bit. But you know what? That very person may need you the most. And they're sitting out here. You see, that's the thing is they could be sitting next to you this morning. And they could be a porcupine, and you're looking for a teddy bear. So, as Christians, let's stop being quick to judge, but rather quicker to forgive and to love that person. Paul also says in Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 23, and I'll break this passage down, but I want to give you all the verses. He starts with some lessons, not from the garbage truck, but from Paul's writing here. And there's three things that I want to bring out this morning. First of all, some things about life, about unpleasant circumstances that all of us go through. Some of us go through unpleasant circumstances. The other thing is many of us go through unreasonable people. Listen, there's some folks that are a challenge out there, but that's okay. We ought to be up for the challenge because we might be one of those unreasonable people. And then the third thing is an uncertain future. Paul shares with us in the parameters of verses 12 through 23 these three things that I want us to look at this morning. Because I believe the apostle shows us that God is able to use negative things that happen to us in our life and to bring about a positive result. Okay? So let's look at that this morning. Number one, an unpleasant circumstance. Paul begins talking about this. He starts with the negative first, and then he's going to grow to some good things. Philippians chapter 1, verse 12 says, "Now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel." So Paul is coming from a very personal reference. Paul is now locked in prison. He's in a dungeon. He is chained to Roman soldiers that are there to watch him. Now remember, in those days, dungeons were not like jails today. I mean, I don't want to be in a jail, no matter how nice they are. But I don't want to be in a jail today. But no matter how bad a jail might be in this country, I want to guarantee you, the Roman dungeon was worse. Folks, it was dug oftentimes into the deepest part of a castle or a pavilion. It was dug down in the ground, so that way the prisoners wouldn't be able to escape. Okay, they had natural. You'd have to dig through a lot of dirt. In that, they were usually damp because just the moisture that is in the ground. They stunk. They didn't have restroom facilities like we have in jails today. No, you had a bunch of straw that you would there go do your stuff. And let me tell you something. Those Roman soldiers didn't want to clean it or change it any more than you would. And so chances are it was there. You weren't fed well. Matter of fact, some of the Romans' prisons, unless you had relatives or some friends or whatever to feed you, you didn't eat much. You'd get the crumbs that they would throw out for you. That was basically it. So I just want to get that mindset. This is Paul. This is Paul writing this. And so again, Paul says in verse 12, I want you to know, brothers, so he's writing to Christians like you and I, what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Now, I had to dig a little bit, because we all have troubles. Anybody here have never had any troubles? No, because we all have them, amen? Well, we all have troubles. But how does that list compare? I mean, sometimes we think, I've had a pastor, you don't know, I've had a rough life. Let me ask you, how many shipwrecks have you been in? How many times have you been out in the ocean? And by the way, they didn't have radios to give an SOS. They didn't have flares. They didn't have lights. They didn't have nothing. So how many of those dangerous situations have you been in? Let me ask you another question. How many times have you been, for your faith now, how many times have you been half beaten to death? As a matter of fact, how many times have you been beaten and left for dead? How many times have you been somewhere where they had to literally sneak you over the city walls so that way you could escape death? How many times have you been naked or hungry or in fear for your very life? How many times have you had to walk miles and miles and miles and miles to share the gospel message? So you see, Paul is saying here, listen, the things that I'm doing, the things that I've done have cleared the way, you might want to say. And so Paul says, I want you to remember these, because these things, I believe, have served to advance the gospel. Now, the Greek word translated advance in verse 12 is an interesting word in history. It is originally used by woodcutters who would go before the army and they would clear out the brush. They would clear out the trees. Remember, the Roman soldiers walked rank and file. And so these men, when the Romans were going to go from one place to another, would go and literally clear forces out so that the soldiers could walk in rank and file. Because remember, they were always ready to fight the fight. And so when Paul is sharing this, he's saying, listen, I'm that person. I, in my life, have gone before you, and I've tried in my ministry to clear a path for you. Folks, our ability to preach the gospel, our ability to witness and to share Jesus Christ with people, that privilege, that honor has been cleared by the patriarchs of old, by preachers of old, by Christian workers of old, by missionaries of old. We're about ready to celebrate our 100th anniversary. And I want to guarantee you, there are people, some are still left in this church, but there are people that have served in this church that has advanced, has cleared the way, so that way you can enjoy what you enjoy today. I was talking to Miss May yesterday. And she was sharing about the fundraisers, the fish fries and the chicken fries. Brother Tommy, do you remember any chicken fries? Not chicken fries, but chicken dinners where you fried chicken. How about the cookbooks? Now, we were selling cookbooks yesterday from the church. Ladies, if you're into cooking, you new ladies, if you're looking for some great recipes, some of the recipes are from ladies from right here in this church. Stop by the office. $5. You can get a big old recipe book, cookbook, that we'd love to share with you. So let me just say to you, what we enjoy here have been paved the way, have been advanced by people here in this church. When I first came here, I was very attentive to one of the pastors on the wall there. And oftentimes, I've come into this very sanctuary to kneel and pray about something. And in my mind, just to let you know, don't try to understand my mind because you get confused. But anyway, I walk in here and I look, and I was always drawn to Pastor Moss, his picture. And I've asked myself, I wonder what he would do. I wonder how he would pray, And they are pastors that are on that wall there that have advanced the way, cleared the way, so that the church could be able to celebrate its 100th anniversary. And so Paul is bringing to mind those things. Paul is saying, remember these trials, that they were for to advance the gospel. And so the Apostle Paul says, even though you may be in some very unpleasant circumstance, I can still use it for the glory and honor of God. Listen, church, you might find yourself right now, at this very moment, in an unpleasant circumstance. But I want to tell you something. If you'll seek the Lord, if you'll turn that thing over to God, if you will be obedient to Him, get into His Word, get on your knees and begin to pray and seek God's wisdom, God can use that thing to turn it around for good in your life. That doesn't mean that situation may go away and disappear. That's not what that's saying. When we say that God can turn things around for the good, God can change us in that circumstance. God might use that unpleasant circumstance to do a work in your life. I know you're sitting back and say, well, but Pastor, I'm perfect. What would God want to put me in an unpleasant circumstance for? I mean, I've not done anything wrong. I've not made God mad. Well, no, you may not. But God still uses these circumstances to work into our life, to get rid of the junk and the garbage and the stuff in there and make us even better than we were before. See, it's a process with God. God wants you more better than you were the day before. He wants you to be conformed to the image of His Son, Jesus Christ. So listen, allow God to work in your life. And so believe me, that's what Paul's trying to say. Now, it goes on to say this in verse 22 of chapter 1 of Philippians. If you'll look there. He says a statement that I thought was really interesting. And again, remember I told you, don't just read the Bible, study the Bible. All right, he says this. He says, all the saints send you greetings, especially those who belong to Caesar's household. Now you've got to stop there for a moment and get a hold of that verse. What is Paul saying here? Well, Paul is saying that the gospel, he said, to all the saints send greetings, especially those who? Those saints that are in the household of Caesar. Well, you know who Caesar was. He was emperor of Rome. Well, how in the world were these people, how did they become saints? In other words, how did they get saved? How did they become Christians? Well, I'll tell you how some of them did. Because Paul was chained to those Roman guards who were citizens for 6 hours a day. They changed shifts every 6 hours. So Paul had a fresh, how can I say it, a victim, you might want to say. Paul had a fresh soldier every 6 hours to share the good news. Paul, because you have to say something. You can't be chained to somebody for 6 hours and not talk to them. Well, maybe one or two of them may have been that way. But I think if you was chained to Paul, Paul was going to find an area somehow to talk about it. He may talk about the steel in the chain. It's pretty good steel right here. Soldier said, yeah, that's Roman steel. My sword is made of that. Oh, really? Well, that's pretty tough. How do you think they make it so tough? Well, they refine it. They put it in the fire. They bring it out, they beat it, they harden it, And Paul said, you know what? That's just what God does to us. God takes our impurity. God takes our weakness. God takes the things that are going, and listen, He puts it in the fire. He refines it. He may beat a little bit on it, but He's going to make us into something good, something solid, something that's going to be enduring. So that soldier goes home that night thinking, that made sense. That makes sense. Next day, his shift comes on. He's chained to Paul. Can you tell me a little bit more about that fire stuff? Yeah, absolutely. So Paul seizes the opportunity. And out of the result of that, people are getting saved. And those Roman soldiers are going back and they're sharing with their family. I've been chained to this old guy over here, and he's been talking to me about this Jesus thing. He's been sharing this, and I just want to let you know, he told me that I could be cleansed of my sins if I only ask this Jesus to forgive me of my sins. And I feel totally different. And his wife says, wow, you know, I've been noticing there's something different about you. There's a change in you. And he said, yeah, this Paul guy told me about this Jesus. And yeah, he's in my heart, my life. And he's changed the way I look and think about it. And so she said, well, how can I get that too? And so the next day he goes up to him and he said, Paul, my wife's very interested. How do I tell her? Paul says, well, okay, fine. But, you know, Paul knew the Roman road. He wrote it, okay? He wrote the Roman road. So he shared with her how to get saved, how to accept Jesus Christ for all of his sins, come short of the glory of God. But the gift of God is eternal life. She's saying, wow, I want that too. Okay, honey, I'll just do what Paul told me to do. Let's get on our knees and ask Jesus to come in your heart. Wow! And so all of a sudden, Paul says, especially those who belong to Caesar's household. So folks, you see, this Christianity thing had gotten into the literal house of Caesar. Now there's a second positive thing that came in Paul's imprisonment. Verse 14, it says, because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. Paul is saying, because of my hardship, because of the things that's happened to me, other Christians have been encouraged. Now, folks, we've talked about this before. Sometimes that you may be going through some things. Sometimes you might be going through some hardships. You might be going through a battle. But you may never know that there may be another person out there. It may be a new Christian. It may be a weak Christian. It could be someone that's totally oblivious to the things of God. But they're looking at you. They've seen something different about you. And they're watching you. And when you go through these trials and tribulations, and you go with your head up in the air, and there's a confidence in your voice, and there's a song in your heart, and they're looking at you, and they know you're not on drugs, so they know that something is in you that's different, and they want to know about it. And it may be simply saying, listen, I think you're a Christian. I've heard you say Christian things. I'm going through this problem. I'm going through this difficulty. Will you pray for me? Bingo. There's your open door. And church, as Christians, that's what we look for. We look for the open door. You don't always have, like I said before, take your Bible and knock them in the head and say you're going to hell and you need Jesus. Sometimes God will use circumstances in their life and he will bring them before you at just the right moment. And you might not be the only one that God has brought before them. You know, a lot of times people have to witness to an individual, and it takes, nowadays they've done studies that it may take 3 or 4 or 5 people witnessing to one individual before they finally get saved. So you may sow a soul. You might sow a seed. You might sow a seed. And all of a sudden, that seed is growing roots, it's sprouting, and that person is at the right point in their life, and you just have to have the blessing of being there when that person says, pray for me. Or tell me about this Jesus. Or tell me why you're so happy all the time. Tell me why it seems like you look at life differently than what I do. And all of a sudden, you can be able to share the love of God with them. Bob Benson, in his book, See You at the House, tells of a good friend who had a severe heart attack and almost died, but was now on the road to recovery. And visited him, Bob, who wrote this book, asked his friend Bill, how do you feel about your heart attack? His friend Bill said, what are you talking about? What kind of question is that? How do I feel about my heart attack? I hate it. It nearly killed me. So Bob asked, he said, well, would you like to have another one? Bill said, what? Are you asking me stupid questions like that? Certainly not. And so Bill said, well, would you recommend it for somebody else? Bill said, Bob, where are you going with this? Have you lost your mind? No, absolutely not. I wouldn't recommend a heart attack to anybody. That's just stupid. Bob went on. He said, but Bill, now that you're feeling better, you just shared with me how you treasure life more, how you treasure your family more, how closer to God that you've gotten, how you enjoy the things of the Lord even better. Bill thought for a moment. He says, you know what? You're right. My relationship with my wife and my family is better than it's ever been before. He says, I enjoy the world around about me even more than I've ever done before. He said, and you know what? You're right. My relationship with God is even stronger than it's ever been before. And so, Bill asked him the question again, has your life then really changed that much after a heart attack? And I'm sorry, Bill, not Bob. Bill said, yes. Yes, it has. It's changed my life completely. And so Bob said, then Bill, in light of what you shared with me, how do you feel about your heart attack now? You see, God can take the most negative thing that could ever happen to us and turn it into something good. You see, you might be here this morning, and you might feel like you're in chains. Something might have you bound. But I'm here to tell you something. If you'll turn it over to God, He'll help you break those chains. Maybe you're in the chains of loneliness or grief or despair. But let me tell you something. Turn it over to the Lord. No matter what it is, it may be your physical condition. It may be facing a heart attack or cancer or anything else. But you can turn it over to the Lord. The second thing is unreasonable people. Paul talks about these. Philippians chapter 1, verse 15. He said, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. What Paul's saying is that there are some people out there that might be envious of me, who see themselves as my rival. Competitors, you might want to call them, in preaching the gospel. And sometimes that's the case. It's easy to get envious of somebody. It's easy to look at that other church, that whoever it might be, and say, you know what, they never have a problem. That church is never split. That church has never seemed to have financial difficulties. That church is, listen, it's easy to always look at somebody else. Oh, it's easy to look at some of these mega churches out there, and they're vast numbers. The cameras scan, in every chair of a 3,000, 4,000 church auditorium. You scan it and you look at every pew, every chair is full. People are sitting there, with their tongues hanging out. Feed me, Pastor, feed me, And sometimes we come into our Norwich Baptist Church and we look around and say, whew, there's plenty of chairs that are empty. Well, what do they have that we don't have? And in church, it's easy to do that. But there's also churches out there that are constantly badgering other churches. I mean, I'm glad that Charles Stanley, at 93, 94 years old, is still preaching hard. And he's still got First Baptist of Atlanta full to overflowing. Man, I'm glad. I'm proud of him. I pray for him. Keep going, Charles. Keep going. The church, you see, our attitude has a lot to do. Billy Graham, who died recently, as we all know, had one of the most spotless reputations of our time. A number of books and articles have been written about his life and ministry. And I don't know about you, but I've had great respect for him most of my life. But he was always aware that there were people out there that wanted to destroy him. They looked into his finances, they looked into his marriage, they looked into every facet of his life, and they really wasn't able to find a whole lot of anything. Matter of fact, Billy Graham once said, my life's really boring. Really it is. I just go out and preach the gospel, that's it. But other than that, I live a very boring life. Well, for example, Billy Graham went out on a crusade, and every crusade that he would go out into in this country and other countries that he would go to, he always sent a team of people to go ahead and go into his room, go into the area around about him, and scan for plants. In other words, he was always out there aware that some tabloid photographer or some group would want to plant a woman hiding in his room, so that way when he went in there she'd be, and they could come in the door and take pictures and ruin the man. So to avoid that, he would send in a team that would go through and they would check out everything. Well, one time when he was overseas, a tabloid photographer had gotten the registry of the motel that he was staying in, and they took a picture of the registry that had his name and another name in it. And they exploited that. They said that the headlines was Billy Graham spent the night with a woman other than his wife. And for proof, they showed the registry, that there was a woman's name registered in the same room as Billy Graham. Well, now, they even printed the name. They omitted one part of the name, and they printed the name. It was Beverly Shea. Now, some of you older folks know exactly where I'm going with this. Because Billy Graham Crusades knows that his best friend, and that had been with him for a long, long time, that always led in worship, but his name just happened to be George Beverly Shea. And even though their efforts were to discredit Billy Graham, the tabloids have made a big mistake. In church, you know what? There's people out there that do that today. Paul was just simply saying, I know that there's people out there trying to discredit me. There's people out there trying to mock me, find things wrong with me. But I want to let you know that I'm living my life for Christ the very best that I can. I'm not perfect, but I rejoice in the fact that God is with me. Number 3, an uncertain future. Finally, Paul mentions this uncertain future. Look at verse 19, if you will, please. It says, I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Christ, Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. You see, Paul is facing trial. He realizes that there are 2 things that can happen. If he's found innocent, Paul knows in the heart he's going to keep on preaching. If he's found guilty, then he'll be executed. But he knew whether he was going to live or whether he was going to die. It would depend on God's grace. He writes in verse 20, I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body. Now, I just want to stop there. Do you hear what Paul's saying? Paul's saying, I'm not concerned about my reputation. I'm not concerned about what this person or that preacher or that individual is thinking about me. Paul's concern is when I stand before a pagan judge and when I stand in a pagan court, that I won't do anything that will embarrass Jesus Christ. Forget me. Forget the outcome. I don't want to do anything that will embarrass Jesus Christ. Paul went on to say, to me, living means opportunity for Christ, and dying, that's even better. Paul says in Philippians 22 and 23, he says this same thing. For if I'm going on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the 2. I despise to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. You see, he didn't know. Paul said, I didn't know. For me to live is to gain, and to die is also to gain in Christ Jesus. And so Paul really put everything into the hands of God. He knew that no matter what he wanted to do in his life, if it is to go on and live, which it didn't, or if it was to end there, then whatever I do, when I stand before my accusers, I want to be able to give glory and honor to God. Kenneth Dodd wrote a book, a Christian book several years ago. It tells about an 8-year-old boy named Frank. Frank had a date with his father to go fishing on Saturday. They were going to go fishing for the whole day. He had looked forward to it. He had looked forward to a date with his dad, but especially he liked to fish. And so he, the Friday night before, got his fishing rod out, his tackle box out. Everything was laid out. He was ready to go. But Saturday morning, storm clouds were already there. And as he got out and went down to the kitchen for a hearty fish and breakfast, the rain began to pour. It rained hard, like cats and dogs. It showed no signs of letting up. So the 8-year-old boy, Frank, began to grumble, began to gripe all morning. He kicked the furniture, he kicked the dog. He was just upset. He had planned so much. He had looked forward so much to that day of fishing with his dad. He finally, his dad said, "Son, what's wrong with you?" He says, "Dad, why did it have to rain today?" And so his dad sat him down and tried to explain. He said, "You know what?" He said, "Farmers need this rain today. There's people out there that base their living on the rain coming down." He said, "Also, the fish need rain." He said, "If it didn't rain, our pond, our favorite pond, would dry up." And so Frank sat there. He said, "But Dad, why does it have to rain today? Can't it rain some other day to do all that stuff?" But about noontime, the clouds began to break up and the sun came out. His dad turned to Frank and said, "All right, we can go fishing. We can't go fishing all day, but we can catch fish, and so let's go." Well, when they began to fish, the fish were just biting. Dad and Frank filled both of their baskets full. They came home that day. They had caught more fish in that half a day than they caught any time before. And Frank turned to his dad, or his dad turned to Frank and said, "Frank," he said, "would you ask the blessing on our fried fish?" 8-year-old Frank prayed this prayer. He said, "God, if I sounded a little grumpy earlier today, it was because I couldn't see far enough ahead." You see, sometimes, folks, we're carried away with circumstances. We're carried away with people. We're carried away with an uncertain future. But I'm here to tell you something this morning. We don't need to be carried away because God's with us. Oh, the clouds may be around you today. There may be some uncertainty in the way you're seeing your circumstances. But I just want to encourage you a little bit today. God's ahead of you. He's already been there. God knows what's going to happen. He's with you all the way. And He, if you will, let Him take your circumstances or those people or whatever it may be. God can turn them out for good for you. He can turn them around for good for you. Amen.